Okay, this is milestone number 2 checkup. So from the last milestone, I was able to showcase that our character was moving and that the camera was tracking based on where the character is. So the camera is still tracking where the player is, and of course our character is able to move with the appropriate animations. So from the previous update is that I was able to shoot. So this is its shooting aspect of the character. The second part of the aspect is pickups. We have health pickup. There I press the button to inflict damage on the character. So now we're going to go towards that pickup. That green pill was able to add health to the character. So anytime the character gets damaged and you're in a bit of a pickle, then you go for the health pickup. The way that the appropriate aspects of the weapons and shooting comes from the projectile sword itself. We're basically supposed to have the appropriate objects to where the character has a weapon holding an inheritance. This would all come with along with the animation setup display. And it will also come with the raycast and transform object. All of this would come with this. The way that the health pickup works is that I have a reference to the player. That is for something in the code down there we're going to get to in a bit. I also have the amount of health that we want to heal to the player. Once we start, we're going to place a rigid body onto the object itself if it did not have one already. Then it doesn't matter if it's nothing in the update. What matters is the on trigger enter. I made it a trigger enter. We're trying to find the collider, which is the object that is going to crash into the current object that we have. And I set it so that if whoever collided with this object happens to be a game object, and the game object is called ParticleKnight, then we perform the heal in one of the modules. Then we call for heal. Heal, what the module does is that it heals the player that we're referencing via script. We're getting the component that it has, which is the heal function. And from the heal function, we're also making a call. We're searching for the heal component. Then we're calling for heal damage. And that will heal and how much it's going to be healed. Then it will call for fade once it does this. Fade is basically going to destroy the object that we picked up, which is the health object. Going back to here, what this function is doing is that, okay, well, we have the player and we're looking for a component, then we're calling for that. And that heal damage is basically this script's heal damage. It's public, so they're able to see it. and we're calling in the amount of recovery, and we're basically adding that to the current health. We're also making sure that the health bar is able to update appropriately. So when we get back to this, you are able to see that when I picked up that health pickup, you're able to see that the character was able to heal. Like so. The other aspect of this update is one that you have already seen from the last milestone, and that is the enemies. I'm going to activate that game object, and within the editor, that game object is actually located here appropriately. And what we have here is that this object right here located, it's going to have a script known as generate enemies. So let's go over to see what that does. Generate enemies. I have a game object of the enemy. Then we have the position range, and this is important later in the script. We also have the enemy count and how many maximum they're allowed to have. This is the amount that it's going to be possible, and this is how many we currently have counted or placed since the start of the game. When it starts, we're going to start the coroutine, which is basically a small function that it's going to keep doing. An I enumerator. What this does is it will drop an enemy into the level. While enemy count is less than the max count, which is ever since the start of the game, if we have not placed anything ever since, excuse me for 1 second. OBS, thank you. I apologize for that inconvenience. What this does is that it's basically, ever since the start of the game, this will keep counting down according to down here. Increase the count by 1 every time. And a random range between 1 and the range of how big your level is going to be. So make sure that when you're doing this, you double check how big your level is, because the random range, this is going to be for the X position and Z position. The reason why we're doing those values is because of how big the level is. As you can see, the blue is your Z, the X is the red. So we want to make sure that it's an area from the level itself. It will instantiate or create an enemy, which is the enemy object, based on the new position, 0 and Y, because we don't want it to be hovering in the sky in Cortenian identity. This yield return new wait for seconds. It's going to put a cooldown of 5 seconds in game time. Then it will make a count, and then the whole process will repeat itself. So that is why whenever we start the game, you have enemies spawned into the level. As you can see, they're also dealing me damage, so that is why the UI is updating appropriately. I can also destroy the enemy objects. So I keep taking damage. There's a new mechanic that I've made, is not new, but basically whenever I deal damage to the enemies, they at least lose 2 health. Each enemy has 4 health. And another new aspect is that I was able to add in a win condition and a lose condition on the side, but that's another check for the milestone, for a later milestone. But if you're curious about the win and lose conditions, I can explain that in a little bit right now. So what I have right here is the fact that we have the canvas. The canvas here, we're going to have a win and lose windows. Within each window, it's going to have a retry or quit button. In there, we also have the appropriate scripts. And I'm going to show you what those scripts are right now. So what those scripts will do is does pretty much the same thing. And they all are based off of scene swap. Within scene swap, when it's awake, I'm doing this for extra measure in case the game is still with the cursor lock state not unlocked. Because if it's not unlocked on the locked state, when we do the scene change to that, then what that does is that it basically creates a very weird aspect of the game, of the camera. So to fix this, we're always making sure that we are always updating the lock state. And this part is basically more so done for the aspect of the retry button and the quit state buttons. Those are different parts of it. What we have here is the play scene, and what we're asking here is, in the case scenario that we're retrying, what I'm doing is I'm basically asking for the scene to play again, but when we play again, what it does is that it resets everything to where it was at fresh value, but somehow it does not change even all the different types of components that the player has. Those for some reason still those changes will always remain regardless if we reload the scene again or not. And this was something that I was able to find. So to fix this issue, I'm making sure that those aspects that were disabled, because I will explain in a bit about what I'm referring to. We're setting the many components of the player. We're activating them. We're making sure that they're active here. Then we're making sure our time within the game, the time scale is set to 1. So that speed's always constant. We also have the application quit, which is when the game is officially going to be quitted. Scene manager, what I have here is a string name to load the specified scene based on the string. You have to make sure that you name this, you make sure you type in the appropriate name of the scene appropriately, or you're going to get errors, or you're not going to transition to the appropriate level that you're referring to. So here we're going to come into play with how the win-lose stages worked, and how you were able to see that my specific pause is doing something that maybe not a lot are able to see. So let me explain what I have done here in this milestone, so that way it transfers to the new milestone. So what I have set up here is that I have the win and lose condition. You're able to see the win and lose condition. When I have pause, we're making sure that, excuse me for a bit. So when we have the pause, we're basically pausing the game. Everything freezes, sets it to 0 when we have here. When I click here into resume, it reactivates everything and the game proceeds again. So when we get to somewhere in the scene of the part that the character gets killed, I'm going to press the Z button to make this faster. Then we lose, and this is the lose scene. So as you can see, we cannot control our character again. Time has been frozen here. What do we do? Okay, well, reloading this scene. Now this is going to be noticeable scene. The color scene's going to be different. Well, this is what's to be expected when you first load the game, and that's going to be based on the stages here. So as you can see, we have our health back up. The enemies that were originally supposed to be here are now back to square one, as if the game has just started a new one. So if we have my character die off again, then we click on retry to load the scene again. Now notice up here in the editor, everything went back to square one. And the reason for that is even happening in the first place is thanks to a different script that I have for the specific scene changes. But first we're going to explain how I've even made the pause menu possible. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically setting, yes, this is the script. So what we're doing here is we're referencing the pause menu, which is somewhere in the canvas. We are checking if we're paused or not. We're not paused when the game is running, so we set that to false. Anytime we press the escape button, then it's going to check if we are paused. Because we're not paused within the following script, then it's going to run the appropriate actions here. We're activating the pause menu canvas. We are setting ourselves that, yes, we are indeed paused. We're setting the time scale to 0. Therefore, time freezes when everything happens. Nothing moves. We're also making sure that all of the components from the player are deactivated. That makes it, the movement, the camera, the projectile as well. Because from what I've noticed is that even if I was able to set the time freezing to 0, when I would press the attack button, then the script for projectile sword was still doing its function even at time 0. That makes it look like an error. So I deactivate it within this script. It calls upon for the components. First, I'm asking it to find the player, the game object. What kind of game object is it? ParticleKnight. And then it looks in the editor for the appropriate game object, which right here, we ask for it in the main scene. And then it goes, ParticleKnight. Oh, this one. Then we're asking for the component. And then those are the components that are listed. Okay, we look for each of those components. Yada, yada, yada. Oh, we found that one. We found it. Then the enabled. What are we setting that to? False. So that's how we're deactivating the script. We're making sure that it doesn't do that again. We are also making sure that the lock state of the cursor is set to none, so that way once we're able to go within the script here, so once we are able to actually utilize the cursor here, when I click out here, the cursor is still appearing. Then, let's say we want to resume the game. Well, the game resumes, everything's set to 1. To iterate, again, the script does is it also continues to update here. Since we were paused, we're deactivating the pause screen, then paused is set to false again. Time goes back to normal, and we're reactivating every single component that the player had. We're also setting that the cursor lock mode is set to locked, so that way the cursor doesn't roam around weirdly. When I did this without this kind of functionality here, we still had the appearing cursor around within the level, and it looked a lot weird, and it kind of felt distracting, and it was just a bit weird for me to be able to control this appropriate movement here again. So then that's what the appropriate thing is, set to false. We also have a scenario for the resume. This whole scenario is exactly the same thing that I have for when it's updated in a pause menu. Just because this is the appropriate pause menu, we also have when we set to quit. This is important. When we set to quit, this is to make sure that the time scale is still functioning appropriately. Then we set the scene manager load screen to load the appropriate scene name. And this is the string that we're calling for. We need to make sure that every single button within the canvas, this is just an example to reiterate because the buttons are actually these buttons right here. We're going to activate the canvas, for example. These are the buttons that appear normally. So I'm making sure that each script reference here, we set to pause menu resume because that's the appropriate script that we're doing in this. Scene swap. Well, not scene swap, but this is the appropriate script, and it runs down and does the operation within the button. So that's what resume does for us whenever we click the button. Same goes for quit. Now the reason why quit does not have all of this aspect here itself, since we're moving to a new scene, the state of the cursor lock is going to become none when we come to the new scene. And we're actually going to go to the new scene right now. As you can see, the cursor is still here. And that's because we're not controlling any object. This is basically the UI of the main menu. This is something for the next milestone. And that is all I have to showcase about milestone 2.